I'm still in Falmouth today. I'm down by the wharf, which is pretty interesting. I haven't been down here before, so I'll just pan around to show you the scene. Falmouth is I don't know, it's a kind of fishing coastal town in Cornwall. Got quite a lot of interesting stuff to look at down here. I'll probably be moving down here next year, so this will be my stomping ground probably from September. Very nice. Anyhow, what I'm really interested in talking about again today is still on this bloody Dogfecker challenge, which, just to reiterate once again, is a set of responses I'm making to a video that Varioblast made, addressed to a number of people, and I consider myself to be one of those people. And the challenge, which was made flippantly, but I'm choosing to take it seriously, was to find explanations for why people might, in Varioblast's phrase, fuck a dog. Explanations which didn't rely on his favourite theory, which is what I have to say is a fairly crudely drawn version of evolutionary biology, basically the dogfucker gene, or a theory that he put out himself, which I'm choosing to call the Goldilocks randy little brother hypothesis, in which, you know, some people have a non-standard sexuality, a hypersexuality, in which they'll basically just fuck anything, dogs or anybody else, or indeed other human beings, regardless of whether they give their consent or not. Because really the full context of this is nothing about fucking dogs, of course. It's really about rape and the role of evolutionary psychology or genetics within rape, whether men have a natural predisposition possibly to rape, which is just kind of socialized into normative behaviour, which so that it's really about that, and whether there are alternative explanations to the fact that rapes go on, other than it's all in your genes, governor. I think I've already made about 5 of these videos providing what I think are far better explanations, or at least other explanations which complexify the evolutionary psychology and genetic contribution, and I want to continue that really in this one, just to remind people what I've talked about. I've talked a little bit about Freud, I've talked about neuroplasticity, I've talked about the way that neuroplasticity functions in early childhood in terms of the moulding of young children into the shape of their social context. I've talked about the second phase of neuroplasticity that happens during teenage years, when young adults, people just moving into adulthood, again go through a period of cognitive development in which they are again shaped and conditioned into the shape of an appropriate psychology for whatever the social environment young adults move around in. And provided, I think, at least some evidence for all of those, at least certainly more evidence than the Goldilocks randy kid brother hypothesis. And now I just want to move into talking a little bit about language. I've made a series of videos about language and sexuality, which I've just mirrored on this site, so I'll provide a link to those. They do contain a lot of swear words, and fortunately or unfortunately, because I do take on words like cunt and fuck and prick, and how those words function within objectification, and how where certain ways of using those words transforms conceptual objects like words into offensive weapons or objects of pleasure. Yeah, anyway, I won't go into that detail right now, because there's a set of videos which kind of I try to pull that out. But what I would want to go into is this second understanding of language. And again, I'm not marrying these ideas, I'm just offering other suggestions and pointing to where evidence of the validity or not can be found. And here I'm really talking about cognitive linguistics, and particularly the work of George Lakoff, who is a really interesting writer. Actually, he's written a series of great books. But the particular book I'm talking about right now, or interested in and referring to right now, is quite an old one of his, and it's called Women, Fire and Dangerous Things, which is probably one of the best titles for a book ever, I think. Women, Fire and Dangerous Things. And in that book he's talking about how categories really, and how categories function in our thinking, and how they appear in our language, and how different cultures do group categories of things together in slightly different ways, and how categories are sometimes represented metaphorically, or different groups of ideas can be put into the same category or function as if they're in the same category simply because they share a common metaphor. And one of the examples he gives in that is one that I think is relatively relevant to this discussion. And it's part of the title, the Women and Fire bit, possibly the Dangerous Things bit. In that he gives an analysis of anger, a really great analysis of anger, what's called a metaphorical analysis, which basically means you look through the literature, you look through what's called a corpus of writing or a corpus of expression, which might be writing, but it might be visual images, cartoons, song titles, lyrics, vernacular speech, conversation, any kind of thing. You look through a corpus of language and you identify what metaphors are being used by people to structure the language, to structure their thinking. And he gives an analysis of anger. And it's pretty compelling, and the conclusion of that is that the way we understand anger is through this central metaphor of a heated liquid in a sealed container, which sounds obtruse, but if you think about it, a heated liquid in a sealed container. And a lot of the way we talk about anger kind of flows from that central image. You know, if you talk about blowing your top, or exploding, or hitting the roof, or you know, feeling the pressure and giving into pressure, and burning with anger, lots and lots of expressions. Or cartoons, you know, if someone's angry in a cartoon, they often have little steam rising from their ears, or little kind of lines on top of their head indicating heat, or their face may be red indicating pressure. So there's lots of that. So that idea is the central metaphor. What's interesting from our point of view here in this discussion about dog fucking and rape is that that's very, very similar indeed to the metaphor that we use to describe sexual passion. Hot liquid in a sealed container, or as well as being used as a key metaphor covertly, it's buried in the language. You don't usually use it up front. Is the same metaphor that's used for sexual passions, particularly male sexual passion. So we talk about people being hot, or we talk about bursting, or we talk about shooting our load, or we talk about that kind of feeling of pressure, or giving in to pressure. So a lot of the language around male sexual energy, sexual, as I say, passion, shares this metaphor. And one of the Lakoff doesn't really argue this in the book, but one of the possible hypotheses that comes out of that, he kind of mentions it, but he doesn't argue it, as I say, is that a lot of the confusion around appropriate male sexual behaviour comes from an overlap with those metaphors. So people, to the extent that people are acting based on their metaphors, and there's some good evidence for that too, that we act out things in accordance with the metaphors that we use to structure our thinking, that quite often when we think we're acting according to the metaphors appropriate to sexual passion, where there's some slippage and we're starting to act out the behaviours appropriate to metaphors of anger and aggression. So male sexual passion has a significant metaphorical overlap with aggression. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not even saying it's necessarily correct. I'm just saying that in the language there does seem to be, if not an explanation, at least an account of why people talk in the way they do, and why a lot of the talk around male sexuality is very similar to the talk around male anger. You know, if you're a wimp, being a wimp is a non-sexy thing to do. Being an angry guy is sexy. You know what I mean? It has those kind of overtones, and it's because of at least so this idea goes, it's because of the overlap in the metaphors, which throws these two behaviours into the same category. And there's no reason why it should be there, really, but the metaphor puts them there. The poetic nature of our cognition throws male sexuality in the same category as male anger, which is a bit of a shame, really. Yeah, look at that lovely maritime scene.